love movies and movie discussions, you've come to the right place. Who am I, you ask? I am the Wiz, and I'm here today to review the 1962 historical epic Lawrence of Arabia, starring Peter O'Toole, Omar Sharif, Alec, Guinness, and Anthony Quinn, directed by David Lean. I think the first thing I want to talk about before I get into the review are basically historical epics themselves. It feels like movies like Lawrence of Arabia are both being made all the time, but also are not made the same way as they were back then, which makes the more recent epics lesser than. Again, historical epics are being made nowadays. In fact, one of the most popular ones from the 2000s is having a sequel come out in Gladiator 2 this year. But I gotta be honest, when I see epics like Lawrence of Arabia or Ben-Hur or even Gone with the Wind, which I watched last year, they just feel different than what they do now. And I think I kind of have an understanding why that is. But before I get to that, let's get to the review of Lawrence of Arabia, directed by David Lean. But before that, let's get into the plot. Due to his knowledge of the region, British Lieutenant T.E. Lawrence, played by Peter O'Toole, is sent to Arabia to find Prince Faisal, played by Alec Guinness. He is sent there to serve as a liaison between the Arabs and the British in their fight against the Turks. However, Lawrence decides to rebel against his superior officer by traveling through a very dangerous desert and attacking a well-guarded Turkish port. In the beginning, I mentioned how the feel of an epic film, it seems a lot different now than it did back then. And I think one of the main things I want to get across first is the amazing visuals and music of this movie. My God, this movie is gorgeous, especially in the first two acts of the film. When you watch Lawrence of Arabia, you notice how the film really plays with space and location incredibly well. And I think it's really two reasons. One, the cinematography is outstanding in this movie. The use of color and the way that the camera works and how it moves throughout the entire film has this really epic feel to it that isn't really replicated anymore the way the filmmaking is done. The other thing with the visuals I noticed is that everything feels tangible, it feels real, and it feels like it's something that can be touched. Probably because all of it could be touched because they all are practical in this, which is kind of what I think epics nowadays are a little bit blunted, because a lot of epics nowadays, they use a lot of CGI and green screen to make up for not being able to use certain locations or creating elaborate sets. And to be honest, these sets on Lawrence of Arabia are large and elaborate and honestly must have been daunting to get right. But the visuals in this movie are incredibly stark, and I think it's a lot that has to do with the fact that everything's practical and what you're seeing is actually something that was on sand and is visible, which gives it this very, I would say, artistically realistic feel. I know that's an oxymoron, but I think if you watch the movie, you'll get what I'm saying. But on top of that, the music of the film, the score, is gorgeous, and it fits incredibly well in some of the most epic scenes in the film. The mixing of music between the British and the Arabs just fits really well, especially as the action picks up. Now, yes, I have gotten to a lot of the visuals and the music, but what about the story? I want to say the story is good, but it's uneven. I want to say first off, the story pre-intermission is an entertaining and sprawling war film. I think this is the strongest part of the film, and this is where T.E. Lawrence actually gets into Arabia to when he reaches the canal, which is where the first two acts are in this. Honestly, it's incredibly effective. The drama that's involved with it and the battles in this are really well done. I think the best part of the film, when they're traveling through that really bad part of the desert, I think visually it's astounding. And then the story and the tension in that scene as well is incredibly well done. But honestly, the dramatic tension kind of ratchets up throughout the entire first two acts of the film, which leads to the end of the part on the intermission, which I really feel the movie should have ended at that point, because my problem is that the post-intermission part is good, but it feels drawn out. And I think a part of it is because I feel like the movie could have properly ended after the second act, and it would have been a great film. But if they would have taken the third act, expand it into a second film, I thought that would have really worked. But the way it is right now, I'm not saying it's bad. I think that overall, it is still a good movie, and what they worked with the near 4-hour runtime, I think worked well in this movie. But it definitely felt drawn out, and when comparing to the first two acts, it's not as entertaining, and it's not as emotionally captivating. But I also think that it has mainly to do with the feeling of Lawrence at at the third act, which really concentrates more on his exhaustion and his PTSD that he was having from all the battles and from what happens to him later on down the film. But speaking of Lawrence, I think Peter O'Toole's performance is very good in it, but I think it plays better in the second half, which I know is kind of weird because I think the first two acts are actually better in this, but the third act I think has his best performance when he's exhausted and he's dealing with the mental issues and the strain of going through all these battles in the desert, and he's just tired of everything. And I think Peter O'Toole's performance is better on that end. I think it's an overall good performance, and I also like Omar Sharif in this movie. I thought he was very good in it as well, but I think that Peter O'Toole's best work in this film is in the second half, but overall a very good performance. And here are the footnotes for Lawrence of Arabia, and I've only got one here. Should the intermission come back for over 3-hour movies? I am thinking I'm thinking of it specifically comes to the movie theaters. I think movies have less and less become a socially engaging hobby. And I think one of it is because we have been taught in the movie theater not to talk to each other during the movie, which, true, I agree with that. But I think that was the beautiful thing about intermissions, where you can have the intermission, you can get up, you can stretch, you can, go to the bathroom if you need to. But then that's where you would start talking about the film before the film continues, and then you could be like, oh man, what do you think of the movie? Oh my God. And I kind of missed that. To be honest with you, I've never had that. But because when I was growing up, I was talking to some people who were really into movies, we would have those conversations. But I think one of the things, if the movie is longer, I think should have the intermissions back for that sole purpose. I think that would be a very good idea. So overall, I recommend Lawrence of Arabia. I think it's production-wise a stunning movie. It is something that, when it comes to epics, it is probably some of the most beautiful I have seen. I even think this is much more beautiful than Gone with the Wind, which had some really good set design. But that being said, I do think the film was a little too long. I think that the third act could have been separated into a second movie or into a second story, and the first two acts could have been expanded a little bit more to make its own film. But even though that's how I feel about it, I still think it's a good movie, and I think it's a movie that if you haven't checked it out, you should. It is just gorgeous to watch. So overall, I am going to recommend Lawrence of Arabia. It is on Prime Video right now, so check it out when you can. Now, if you want my full review on this movie, you can go to my website at IamTheWiz.com. You'll have my full written review right on the site, along with a link to the video that has this review that you've just listened to. Okay, so for Thursday, me and Zero are going to be reviewing Walkabout, directed by Nicolas Roeg. Saturday, I'll be reviewing Dune Part 2, directed by Denis Villeneuve. And on Tuesday, I'll be reviewing a film that I have been waiting to watch for a long time. It's considered one of the best films of all time by not only filmmakers, but film critics as well. It's also on Roger Ebert's Great Movies list. And that is Yoshiro Ozu's Tokyo Story. This is also on the Criterion Collection. This is a beloved film, and this is something that I have wanted to watch for a long time, and I'm going to take the time to watch it now. So, Thursday, me and Zer are going to review Walkabout, directed by Nicolas Roeg. Saturday, I'll be reviewing Dune Part 2, directed by Denis Villeneuve. And on Tuesday, I'll be reviewing Tokyo Story, directed by Yasujiro Ozu. I am The Wiz, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.